markets actually took fright because it was essentially the worst case scenario of would they get a smaller percentage and then have to make a deal with one or many of the devils that float around our political environment. So on the day or two after the election, when we really didn't know what was going on, I'm going to give you a test in a moment, right? And the test would be that if I can give you some advice, don't read what's up there, listen to what I'm saying, because I'm going to do that in a moment, right? So I'm just warning you. But we started to put some scenarios together of what could happen, and I think when you do some scenario analysis, you do some decision tree sort of analysis, you're trying to take a little bit of the emotion out of it and sort of assign some probabilities on a slightly more rational basis as to what you think might happen or might not happen. And so we actually assigned a 60% probability to an ANC sort of DA coalition and 40% going the other way. As you can see, there was sort of there were various permutations, and you kind of get to sort of 60, even 80% wouldn't be the worst case scenario, but it wouldn't be great. Then as things unfolded, we moved on to the government of national unity. And if you see up in the top little corner, at this point in time, it's quite a skinny little bit. It wasn't the fat one. And we didn't really know exactly what was going to happen. We, like everybody else, were pretty unsure of what was going to happen. We thought about a few different scenarios, and we thought, well, there could be DA agreement. The DA could have got really stubborn. They'd been known to be stubborn before, and they could have got stubborn and said, no, we're not joining the government of national unity. Our demands have not been met. We're not prepared to work with other parties. And that was a real possibility. And we assigned initially a 50% probability to the DA agreeing and other probabilities. And then last week, when we were presenting this in Cape Town and in Joburg, we changed the probabilities a little bit as each day went by. But now we have to put a line to that one too. So we're moving swiftly on. And you can just see how many times we've had to update this presentation in the last 10 days, just because of how quickly events are unfolding at the moment. But it's very exciting. And then essentially, this is where we sit at the moment. We sit, you can see that all the goods got a little bit better. He's eaten well over the last couple of days. If we're sitting in a situation now where we have got a GNU, we've got an agreement and a broad coalition of sort of relatively like-minded parties. And now we're really waiting for, I suppose, the next step in the process is to see exactly what the composition of cabinet is. It's obviously, we don't think that there's going to be any change to the finance cluster. That would be the finance minister, the Reserve Bank, SARS. We include the NPA in that category. And we're quite happy with that. But then the DA might get some nice cabinet posts, which we think will be quite positive. And we assign a 90% probability to the top situation unfolding, and 10% probability to the other. And that's, if you really take a step back and think about it, that 90% probability was probably the 50% probability in my very first slide. And what we really seem to be ending up with at the moment is almost the best case scenario that we could hope for going into the elections. So from that point of view, there's a lot to be grateful for on the one side, but really a lot to celebrate. I mean, this is probably the most positive situation we've had in this country for a very long time. Obviously, the composition of the cabinet will be quite key, and I'm sure that the road is not going to be smooth going forward for the government of national unity. Of course, there are going to be hiccups, and the press is going to almost say the lights in pointing these hiccups out. But I think you just have to take a step back, know that there's going to be hiccups, but actually the path that we're on, we've avoided a couple of disastrous paths when we always tend to price in the worst case scenario in this country, which very seldom materializes, thank goodness. We're on a very positive path. It doesn't mean to say there's not going to be a few potholes and twists and turns. We can really take part in the fact that if you'd given this outcome 3 weeks ago before the election, everybody would have taken it with both hands and both feet and everything they could have thrown at it. And now that it's happening, almost there's a skepticism already. But markets reacted. I mean, in the last, this just shows a few different things over the course of this year. And you can just see how quickly markets have reacted. The all-share index, we use the CAPS index as a better representation of the market. is essentially the new all-time high. These charts don't go back, you know, a long time, but it essentially is a high. The property index is really hugely. The rand is back at sort of 18 to the dollar at the moment. And you can just see how much these things have moved around. So the market's spoken with the speed. But I want to say that these moves that we've seen in the last 4 or 5 days, as spectacular as they are really just down to one thing, and that's sentiment alone. They've got nothing's changed in the country. Yes, we've got some positive political developments, but nothing's changed economically. And if you've listened to me in the past, you will know that share prices go up because profits go up. Profits haven't gone up yet. All that's changed, the sentiment has changed, and is the prospect of a brighter future. And that's exactly what share prices have reacted to. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But really, I think the starting point for this evening is really to say that this is probably the best position we could possibly be in after the elections, and I think we should acknowledge that and take a lot of part from that. We're very excited. So where is SA, if we leave the election aside now, where is SA otherwise? And I think I just want to touch on 1 or 2 points, because I think this is crucial into how we see the next year or 2 unfolding. Obviously, we talk a lot about reforms, and there were 5 key reforms that government set out to do. So they have this office in the presidency, and it's called Operation Vulindlela, and they set out to do 35 reforms, which you can sort of see on the right-hand side there. 26 of those reforms are largely done and dusted and are complete, or they're nearing completion, and there's no obstacles to them being completed in the next couple of months. There's 7, well, there's 9 that are basically behind schedule. And the 2 that are really facing challenges, the one is the fuel price formula, which I don't think they've even tackled yet, which is a pity because we'd all like to see the fuel price come down. And the other one is about municipal electricity distribution. And I think that's essentially coming in phase 2 of these reforms. But what's so important is that I want to move on to electricity, because I want to use this as a case study to understand why we talk about reforms so often and what the potential is. If you look at electricity, you will remember, and I'll show you on the next slide, but you'll remember back in 2021, 2022, we had bad load shedding. In 2021, government started to change part of the laws. And one of the things they started to do was to raise the threshold. If you wanted to build your own power plants, there was a threshold of 1 megawatt. Now, 1 megawatt is tiny, it's really insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But there was a threshold of 1 megawatt, and they started to change it in 2021, and they raised it to 10 megawatts. And then they raised it to 100 megawatts. But then only in December 2022 did they actually abolish the limit completely and move, and you know, you can now build a plant of whatever size. And that was the turning point that really got things going in this country. That was basically less than 2 years ago from where we stand at the moment. But and since then, they launched this energy one-stop shop where within the presidency you could bring your projects that would fast-track some of the approvals and things that you needed. You can see on the right-hand side all the projects that came through the energy one-stop shop, and that was the EOSS stands for. You can see that over the next 5 years, about 20 gigawatts of new power is coming online, and these are all projects that have been approved. But if you think about it, the big reform, it obviously started in 2020, but the big reform happened in 2022, at the end of 2022, and we're only seeing the benefit of that now. So as much as it's frustrating, I think what we get frustrated about is that there is actually quite a lot of stuff going on in the background, but we don't see the benefit of it immediately. But it is important that it's happening in the background. And in the next year or 2, it should manifest itself, and it'll become apparent to us. But don't lose heart in the fact that we still have load shedding, or you know, the press is still complaining about transits. They're going to complain for a while, but from our point of view, we see a lot of change happening in the background, which is why it's so important. And it's just a reminder in the whole corner down here of why reform is so important. I mean, at the moment, we're really only growing at sort of between 1 and 1.5% if we're lucky. But all these reforms have the ability to raise our growth rate to sort of 3.5%. And it's encouraging that we are well through the reform process and making progress on it. And so where do we stand on load shedding? I mean, this is, again, it's a good example. What have we been? 2 weeks now, 3 weeks since the election, we're still haven't had a day of load shedding. So the skeptics amongst us be shamed. You know, we thought that load shedding was happening on the Thursday after the election. But, you know, people say, well, you know, we didn't have load shedding before the election because of political pressure. That's absolutely right. There was enormous political pressure last year over the whole of 2023 to sort out the load shedding problem. And it's only because load shedding got so bad and the pressure on the ANC got so intense that really a lot of action was taken. And so this time last year, I remember telling everybody that one of the things that, if you remember at the beginning of last year, if you look at the chart, sorry, the chart that takes the start of last year. At the beginning of last year, the chart on the right, a lot of red and brown, and that means that load shedding was the most intense. But in about June last year, business went to government and said, listen, we are absolutely allowed to send. We're seconding 130 CEOs to government to help us sort out the problem. And business committed to working with government to sort out the problem. And again, everybody was very skeptical. Those CEOs went into Transnet, into Eskom, and they've just done the things that you normally have to do in the business. I mean, running a big corporation is actually very homogenous in a way. It doesn't matter if you sell cars or buy electricity or something. Big corporations are big corporations, so they largely need the same things to run. And you go in there and you improve controls to make sure people are doing what they're meant to be doing, to make sure the right people are doing what they're meant to be doing, and actually things fall into place. And that's all that these CEOs have done. They've actually made sure that Eskom, the people at Eskom are incentivized correctly, they're in the right places, they're doing the right jobs, the controls are in place, and we've seen the benefit. So it's performing at its best level in 3 years at the moment. Now that is nothing to be celebrated, and everybody is very skeptical and saying, well, they're running their diesel generators flat out. It is simply not the case. We'll actually have a child in Intuition this week. Sorry to let the cat out of the bag. Sorry, not this week, next week. That will have a chart of that. But actually, Eskom hasn't been using its diesel generators at all. The coal fleet is performing at a substantially better rate than it has done for a long time. And you can see it coming through in load shedding, which is really positive. If you think just back to this time last year, how much businesses were spending on diesel and load shedding mitigation, and you had Shoprite spending 1.5 billion rand on diesel and things just to try and keep the trucks cool, keep the shops cool, keep the fridges on. They're not having to spend that money anymore. So that's they either invest that money at lower prices, or they can pull back a little bit of profit for themselves, and it'll probably be somewhere in between. So the reform story is really good. And I think what's really encouraging out of the government of national unity is that the basis for that government was respect for the Constitution and a commitment to ongoing reform. All the parties have committed around that. So we really see this momentum continuing. Hopefully we get to see the momentum actually gaining speed and actually the reforms happening at a faster level, which I think is certainly what the business community is hoping. Unfortunately, having said all that, South Africa is just caught in the midst of a cyclical downturn, as we often do. We're sort of recessionary times, it's pretty tough out there, and the reasons why it's like that. Banks serve as sort of national payments network, and they process billions of transactions between bank accounts every day and every month. And so they compile, they sort of accumulate all their data, and they compile an index of how much salaries are growing year on year. And you can see that salaries are growing at about 6%, the sort of total salary bill across the economy. That sounds like quite good news. Salaries are growing, people have more income. That's not a bad thing. Unfortunately, the chart in the middle is kind of where it all goes wrong. That's because interest payments, so that's how much interest we have to pay on all our debt. So you can see the blue line hasn't changed particularly much. The blue line has gone largely stable, which means that the total level of debt in the economy is broadly stable when relative to how much income is earned. But the red line is where it's all gone wrong, and that's the amount of interest that we have to pay as a percentage of income. And you can see that that's basically the sort of 10-year high. So people are paying a lot more interest on their debt than they were a year or 2 or 3 ago, and that's what's really hurting at the moment. And also because interest rates went up so quickly, you can just see, obviously they fell very quickly in COVID, but they went up so quickly and they brought a huge amount of people off guard, and people weren't prepared for that. And in addition to that, if you just look on the right-hand side and you just think about fuel prices, just take for a moment, I think sometimes we are so quick to forget where fuel prices were, but if you look at kind of where fuel prices were before COVID, 15 rand a litre there or thereabouts. And now petrol prices are 25 rand a litre, you know. 10 rand a litre is a lot of money per litre. And if you have a car that's quite thirsty, then you certainly feel it. So, listen, petrol prices are coming down. One of the benefits of political stability is the rand strengthening. That takes pressure off oil price, or rand oil price, petrol prices can come down, and we can have a virtuous circle unfolding where inflation comes down. So you can see our inflation on the left-hand side there. That's bang in line with where the Reserve Bank wants it. So the Reserve Bank really should be in a position now, especially with a stable election and a pretty favorable outcome, to start cutting interest rates. So there's no reason why the Reserve Bank shouldn't start cutting interest rates. The money market is starting to price on the fact there will be cuts. Hopefully by September, it might be a little bit later. The one problem is that our Reserve Bank has always been quite cautious, and there's a debate about whether we would be brave enough to cut our interest rates before the US cuts their interest rates. And obviously the US is changing its mind every day. But certainly the conditions are now right for us to start cutting interest rates, which will start to alleviate some of the pressure that we've been feeling. So just to start off on SA, it really has been a pretty tough time, but I think from a political point of view, we've got the best outcome we can possibly get. And I think we should really be pretty confident about that and very excited about it. From our point of view, reforms are on track. And I actually think that one of the consequences of the GNU is going to be an acceleration of reforms. I think there's going to be, hopefully there's going to be some more accountability in Parliament and a little bit more transparency, and we'll get things done a little bit quicker than we have done in the past. If you look at business confidence on the right-hand side there, you can see, I mean, the red line is only measured every quarter, so it's a little bit out of date. The blue line is actually picking up quite nicely, and there's a very sharp downward spike in the blue line. And that's because the blue line, the last data point that's done every month, was actually measured in the last week of May when we had the elections. And that's our open start to measure confidence, because everybody's so jittery and nervous and things like that. But I would expect that blue line to reverse next month and to start ending up. And if we have better confidence, then that's really a precursor to business starting to invest again. And then we should have some rate cuts in the next sort of 6 months, which will start to unfold this sort of slightly better cycle. So from that point of view, I think the future looks a lot more promising than the past. I want to spend one quick moment on listed property, because listed property is a big sector for us. A lot of people in the room here will rely on listed property for some of the income that they get. And it's been a pretty tough place to be. I mean, everything that could have been thrown in this core sector has been, they've had to deal with every crisis imaginable over the last 5 years. They've had to deal with state capture, failing municipalities, which makes owning property pretty difficult and expensive because you're self-providing. You've had to deal with load shedding and electricity prices. You've had to deal with COVID and people not paying rent. You've had to deal with the riots. You've had to deal with the rising interest rates. I mean, what more could possibly go wrong for this particular sector of the economy? And it's been a tough time. But I think the one thing that South African companies are pretty good at doing is not sitting and wallowing in their own doom and gloom, but actually saying, well, what is in our control, and what can we do, and what can we sort out? And that's exactly what's been happening for the last sort of 5 years. Companies are, okay, we need to sort out our vacancies, we need to sort out our rent, we need to sort out our balance sheet. And largely all that has been happening, and it's becoming increasingly, companies are in increasingly good shape. Then what you need is improving sentiment. And basically, towards the end of last year, and you'll remember towards about the end of October, markets actually fell really badly. It was just before our medium-term budget, and everybody was very jittery about our own finances of South Africa as a country. And then, you know, Israel basically, well, Hamas invaded Israel in October last year, and there was a lot of fear about a Middle East war, justifiably so, and whether it's spill across into the rest of other places. At the end of October, the listed property index was 270 points. Last night it was 360 points, but when I did this slide, it was about 330, 335 before the rally of the last couple of days. But why that's so important is that ultimately with unlisted property, your cost of capital, how much it costs you to raise money, is really, really important in how you grow. So if you think that you're going to go and buy a flat in Hyde and you're going to go and rent it out, you're going to kind of do your sums on the back of an envelope, and you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to go and buy for this amount, and then my mortgage payment is going to be X. I'm going to get that amount of rent, and either the numbers make sense or they don't. And if they don't make sense, you're not going to go and buy the flat. And that's exactly the problem that listed property companies have faced. If they can't raise money at an acceptable rate, then it's very hard to deploy that money, even though they see opportunities, if it's going to be dilutive to their profits, because shareholders don't tolerate that very kindly. We've quite a hard batch to keep happy, I have to say. So, but what's basically happening at the moment is that there's a share price rally. Already over the course of this year, 3 or 4 companies have started to raise money, which we haven't seen for about 5 years. And it's a really positive turning point, because now what obviously happened in the last couple of days just reinforces that. But you can start raising money, you can start issuing shares, because if you issue shares today versus 3 months ago, you're going to get significantly more money for the same amount of shares than you did 3 or 4 months ago, which makes it much easier to raise capital. And the last part that needs to fall into place is for interest rates to fall, and then you can actually go to the bank and raise debt money as well at a cheaper rate. And so we really do believe that we're on the cusp of a much, much brighter time for listed property. We've been engaged with a lot of property companies over the last sort of 3 months. There's a lot of reporting coming out, and almost uniformly, property companies see a huge amount of opportunity. They haven't seen this much opportunity for about 15 years. But the only concern they have is whether they can raise money at a cheap enough rate to take advantage of those opportunities. And as soon as you get something like this positive election, share prices rally, that changes the equation completely, and they can go and pursue those opportunities. Then you get the growth, you get stronger distributions, and the whole cycle turns much more positive. So it's been a very patient ride on the listed property, but I have to say that we do think that patience is going to be rewarded. And so, you know, we talk up here, we talk about different things and different trends going on, but how do we then marry it all down into your portfolios and decide what shares we're going to have in portfolios? So this is really just a quick summary of how we're thinking about South African portfolios. We still like to support the consumer, the social grant. That's not going to change under a new government. We're going to continue dishing out social grants, you know, like there's no tomorrow. You're always going to have your pockets of excellence in this country, your Richemont, your Bidcorps and Mondis that are just great companies that have globalized that are doing really well. But on the right-hand side of the chart here, we're going to talk a little bit more about inflation in a moment, but I think you want some inflation hedges, some commodities. And there's a whole group of companies in the middle there that already stand to benefit from the reform that's going on in this country, a bit of estate optimism, and the potential for a bit of extra growth in this country. And I gave an example this morning, and I just want to repeat that example. The JSE is a good example of just how quickly things can change. The JSE is the company that controls the stock market and all the ancillary services around that. And one of the ways they make money is by how much volume or how much value is traded on the stock exchange each day. And you know, 5 years ago, probably 20 billion rand of shares would trade every day at JSE. Over the last year, they've probably fallen on average to about 15 or 16 billion rand a day. Sometimes even low as 12 billion rand a day, which is really, it sounds like a lot of money, but it's actually pretty dismal. And you'll have the odd day where it's 50 billion if there's a future spread out, but we can have some very, very low trading days. And that just, you know, that's partly because foreign investors are not interested in South Africa at all. And secondly, because South African managers have been taking money offshore, and so they're not investing it in JSE companies, they're investing it overseas. In the last 4 or 5 days, turnover on the JSE has been 40 billion rand a day. So that's very exciting. If you, the CEO of JSE, you're rubbing your hands in glee, and you know, your ship is finally coming. But that's how quickly things can change. So sentiment changes, people start trading, foreigners start bringing some money into the country, volumes pick up, and the JSE is profitable. I mean, if that's sustained, even if it's not sustained at that level, if it goes back to 25 billion a day, you're going to have a significant upturn in profits. And that's really why, that's where this whole group of companies really benefits from a better attitude towards SA and hopefully some higher growth. So that wraps up the SA portion. I now want to go down to Umhlanga, stand on the pier, look out into the ocean, look at cast our eyes, and actually we need to be in Cape Town. We want to look westwards over the Atlantic Ocean. Umhlanga is in the wrong place. But let's just think about things globally for a moment. And I want to start off with just talking a little bit about the last 20 years in the world, and it's a relatively, I say, unique period. It's an interesting period. We came out of the Cold War in 89, 90. Essentially, peace started to flow throughout the world. China was admitted into the World Trade Organization in 2000. But that peace dividend that came out at the end of the Cold War, governments weren't spending money on defense anymore. They started spending money on other things. It was a period where money and capital and people and goods moved around the world pretty freely. So we started outsourcing to everywhere, which way, you could make things cheaper in China. That imported a lot of deflation. I mean, TVs and consumer goods got cheaper and cheaper, so it brought in deflation. It was a pretty happy time. And we would argue that the last 50 years of 2% inflation was really quite a unique period in history that is not necessarily going to be repeated. And I think the world is already changing. It was changing before COVID. If you remember, during Donald Trump's first presidency, hopefully we're going to say this is last presidency, if I can't be certain of that. But he started putting tariffs on Chinese goods in 2018, 2019. The markets were very unsettled about that. COVID accelerated some other thinking. It's not about just in time anymore. It's about just in case. It's about bringing your factories closer to you. It's about, you're actually not concerned that things are the lowest cost anymore. You're concerned about security of supply. There's war around in the world, and that's having an impact on things. And we would just argue that we're not really going back to the 2% inflation environment globally that we've had for such a long time. And if we think that's the case, then we have to think about offshore portfolios in particular a little bit differently. So my chart on the right there, I also want to leave you with an interesting stat that you can use for dinner parties and show how knowledgeable you are. But of all the dollars that have ever been printed in the world, 40% of those dollars were printed in 2020 and 2021 in response to COVID, and the US just throwing money at the problem. You can see how much the Federal Reserve balance sheet expanded over that period. And you're having a situation now where there was this period of very, very cheap money, and there was a lot of money around. Interest rates were zero, and that propped up financial assets a lot. Now we're entering a stage where interest rates are a lot higher. Money is actually being withdrawn from the system. You can see the line turning on the right-hand chart there. And it's just a slightly more tricky environment. So I don't really want to be a doomsday. Yeah, what I'm saying is I think we have to think about offshore investments a little bit differently going forward. So this is where US inflation is. You can see that the lines there are sort of converging into sort of 3.5%. But the red line is actually a concern. The red line is services, and that's things like medical, your rent, your education, all those kinds of things. In America, that inflation rate is still sort of 5.5%. And I think it just reinforces the fact that to get inflation back down to 2% is actually quite a tricky task. It's not going to happen overnight, and I think we have to be, be expecting inflation to go back to 2% in the next couple of months. I think you're going to be disappointed, and it has implications. And one of the reasons is the chart on the right. So one of the things we look at and we track is how much it costs to ship a container around the world. Now, I know there's some shipping people in the audience today, so I hope I get my facts right, otherwise I'll be rude off the stage. But if you just look at that chart, this is generally shipping a container from China to either Europe or to Los Angeles. If you look at that chart, it's been pretty stable, $2,000 a container for a long time. I mean, there's a little bit of fluctuation in things, but generally speaking, the cost of shipping a container was pretty standard, pretty well known, didn't fluctuate much. You could build that into your pricing and be pretty comfortable that you're going to get that price. Then suddenly we had the Ukraine war, and we had COVID, and shipping containers went through the roof. Then they came all the way back down again, prices subverted, and now they're rising again. And they're rising again for a number of reasons, partly because of the war in the Middle East. Before the war, 60 container ships a week went through the Suez Canal. Now 10 ships are going through the Suez Canal a week because they're afraid of getting bombed and blown up by the rebels in Yemen. The Panama Canal, they've got a drought in Panama. You can't get big ships through the canal because there's not enough water. So small ships can go through, but you can't get big ships through. So these are completely idiosyncratic reasons, but they just come together. So you've got war, you've actually got because of what's happening in the Middle East, ships are going around Africa, unfortunately not really stopping here. But they're not stopping because they're behind schedule. They're not stopping at ports and picking up empty containers because they're behind schedule. And so you're now having a mismatch in the world where the empty containers are sitting in some place and the full containers are in another place, and it's actually chaos. If you're in logistics, it's actually chaos out there. But the point is that container prices are rising, and you can get to the bottom dollar of ShopRite or Woolies or Truworths or whoever it is paying much more per container to get their goods here. They're going to pass that price on to you, or to Americans, or to Europeans, whoever it is. And so one of the reasons why inflation isn't coming down is because the world is just not as predictable as it used to be. But I want to give you some comfort, cold comfort maybe, that what's happening in America and Europe is exactly the same as what's happening here. So we are not alone in our struggle with everybody thinks that the cost of living is rising and food is so expensive. It's actually happening in America too. So they're spending more money on their interest payments than they have done in the last 50 years. Yes, it's 2.5%, it's not 9%. I do know that, but relative to their own history, Americans are feeling poorer because they're spending a lot more money on interest than they have ever done, well, they haven't done for a long time. Their fuel prices are also higher than now, well, higher than they were before COVID. And consumer confidence in America is just trending down. People are getting less and less confident, and the mood is turning a little bit more somber in the US. So if we just look at where global interest rates are, you can see on the chart on the left, there's a little downturn in the blue line, and Europe cut their interest rates last week. And it was touch and go whether the Bank of England would cut their interest rates today. They actually didn't, but they're sort of signaling that they'll probably cut in August. America is vacillating. But on the chart on the right, it basically shows the forecast for American interest rates. And the point about this chart is that the red line is where we thought, well, is what the market thought interest rates would be in November last year. So typically in November, the forecast for American interest rates was the red line, and they should have been cut 3 or 4 times already. Now we're sitting at the green line, and the point is that with every passing month, the expectation for interest rate cuts in America gets pushed further out, and it gets shallower. And again, I think it's in response to people realizing that inflation is not coming down any as quickly, and they need to adjust their expectations. And so why do we actually spend so much time talking about inflation? Because there's actually a very clear correlation between the inflation rates and your valuations on shares. And it's pretty simple to understand. You have high inflation, you have high interest rates. If you have high interest rates, you have lower valuations. It's kind of largely as simple as that. And you can start to see where the blue dot is roughly where the America sits at the moment. It might be 1 or 2 dots around that, but that's largely where it is at the moment. And so if we think that inflation is going to stay at 3.5 or 4%, then the market's completely overdated. It should be basically where the horizontal red arrow hits the dotted line. And if you look at the stable at the bottom here, you can see that the PE ratios essentially at record highs if you discount the distortions caused by COVID and the financial crisis. But you can see in the table at the bottom there that the table at the bottom basically shows the forecast for all American profits over the next 3 years. So if American companies deliver the profits that they're expected to over the next 3 years, they will get to, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. They will get to a PE of 17.9 in 3 years' time, which is largely where the red arrow is on the top there, the horizontal arrow. And so you can say, well, that's perfect. So in 3 years' time, we will be back at the dotted line, and what's there to worry about? But that implies that there's 0% return from American shares for the next 3 years to get back to where it is. So the market's already essentially pricing in a lot of the good news. And so again, we don't want to say that the American market's going to collapse. I don't think that's the case. What we say is to be a little bit more circumspect, and don't expect, I mean, for the last 5 years, it's really been about America or nothing in the world. And don't expect the past to necessarily repeat itself, because that it never does. It maybe rhymes, but it never repeats itself. But we do think about global portfolios as well. We obviously do, and we go through the same process in talking about themes. And so, you know, globally, you're always going to have people that are getting richer and who are coming out of poverty and getting wealthier. There's a lot of countries that are growing quite fast. and those people are getting wealthier every year. So you have that aspirational consumer, and when you get wealthier, you're going to go and spend more money, and you're going to, instead of drinking some dodgy brew on the side of the street, you're going to migrate to a nicer beer, and you're going to migrate to a premium beer, and so the case goes on. It's happened the world over. So there are always going to be those companies that people aspire to do, and they capture that spending. And the story about big tech and AI and big data hasn't gone away, and it's obviously driving a lot of innovation at the moment. We think that's going to continue. You kind of want to be part of that, but you probably just have to be a little bit cautious about what you pay for some of these companies and make sure that you're not overpaying. But on the right-hand side, one of the consequences of AI and big data is things like data centers. So a normal data center, if you keep your stuff in the cloud, if you keep all your photos in the cloud or something, those photos are kept in a data center somewhere. That consumes on average about 20 kilowatt hours of electricity. A data center running AI equipment consumes about 80 kilowatt hours of electricity. So there's a 4 times greater demand for electricity from AI kind of related data centers than there is from normal. And so you actually, the Americans haven't invested in their grid, Europeans haven't invested in their national grids for years. So we don't, we know that. But the same thing actually plays out around the world. So there's actually a big opportunity in a lot of companies that supply national grids, wires, cables, all the stuff that makes electricity flow around the world. Obviously, all the commodities that are required for that. We think you want some commodities and you want some inflation hedges. And obviously, one of the ways to hedge against inflation is through commodities. But there's some great companies out there that have really good pricing power. I've used the example of Mondelez on my slide. Mondelez owns Cadbury, and we all know that chocolate is an absolute necessity. It's very income inelastic. Doesn't matter what the price of chocolate is, we'll buy it anyway. And so, you know, the great companies out there, L'Oreal is another one, where regardless of the price of the product, you're still going to buy it. And then those can be just as effective inflation hedges as commodities. And then, you know, as the world changes, we really have to think about whether we want to be in emerging markets or developed markets, whether you want growth companies or value companies. And I think the world is changing a little bit from that point of view. So we're well on top of that, and we're looking at a lot of different things. So we're not saying you don't want to do investments, you certainly do. But we're just saying that you should recognize that the world is changing, and that maybe what's been the hot sector for the last couple of years is not going to be the hot sector for the next couple of years. So that's really where I want to end up tonight. I think in summary, I really just want to reiterate our point of view that from a South African point of view, we should really be celebrating. I hope you're going to celebrate with us afterwards and drink the bar dry. But this is really is the best possible outcome that we could have anticipated before the election. If we'd said at the start of the year that this was going to be the outcome, I don't think anybody in the room would believe that, quite honestly. We probably wouldn't believe it either. But now that we've got the outcome, everybody's quite skeptical. We really should embrace it, and there are going to be potholes along the road. But what we need to see from here, so the market's got an initial reaction, that's a sentiment thing, and that will evolve a little bit, and a little bit of everybody will sober up, so to speak. But what we really need to see now is a solid cabinet being appointed, and for you know, and if that is the case, you'll see business confidence rising, and you will see the growth rate starting to pick up in this country, especially if the reform momentum gets a bit going and government has a little bit more urgency about it. And let's face it, the ANC's got a lot to prove. If they want to be anywhere remotely in power in 5 years' time, they're going to have to deliver on some things. Otherwise, the writing's pretty much on the wall. This could be their last administration. So there's a lot for them to prove and to get right as well. And then, yeah, globally, I mean, it's not all fall down, but just don't get sucked into the notion that everything's just the same. I think the world's changing, and it's interesting. It's maybe a little bit unsettling, and sometimes we find our politics. You know, are we Eastern focused or Western focused? But the world is changing, and I think that it's just it's interesting and it presents opportunities, and we busy mulling over lots of those opportunities at the moment. So thank you very much. That's what I have to say. I think I'll keep you for a long time. I'm very happy to answer any questions if there are. Wow, okay. Yes, okay, let's start. I'll go start on that side, Daryl.
So you've got a very global there, so obviously a hedge.
And take off the screen, so you can't ask me anymore. You didn't see the video. No, you didn't see the video. Yeah, listen, I mean, NVIDIA's done exceptionally well, and it's obviously got the chips at the moment to drive AI. You know, it does have a competitive advantage at the moment. I don't think that will last forever. And I think what I was really saying about growth companies versus value companies and high inflation is that what does happen if you have high inflation and interest rates that high is that valuations tend to compress a little bit. So you have to be quite wary about buying companies on very high valuations, because those are the ones that are much more susceptible to changes than the others. If you buy something on a P of 7 or 8, it hasn't got far to fall. But if you're buying something on a P of 60 or 70, then it has got quite a lot to fall. So that's why it's there. But yes, I mean, gold, we think, you know, we think gold could have its moment in the sun. You probably want some gold, you might want some food grades, but gold has a much more geared to a rising gold price. Yes, sir.
Mine is very complex, that I'm sure. In your first section, in terms of local, and talking about trying to revert back to rail freight, are we talking about bulk freight in terms of coal and iron ore? If we're not talking about those, are we talking about the general freight that we see in terms of the road freight at this time? And with that, then the question is how is government going to get that freight back onto rail?
Yeah.
Because pre-1994 was when the government actually gave permission for it to move away from rail and onto rail.
Yes, correct. I need to repeat that for the online users.
Sure.
Because the question really is about the reforms in transit, I suppose, and whether we're moving freight back from road to rail, and whether it's just the bulk freight or general freight as well. So yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think they're talking about all sorts of freight. I mean, Transnet, I think Transnet, well, is really trying to focus on a couple of key corridors. So the iron ore corridor is obviously very important. It's much more economical to transport coal and iron ore by rail than by truck. And so there is definitely a focus on getting, especially, I mean, the iron ore link has always been working, but not at optimal capacity. The coal link, the richest player, is the one that really puts strain and is obviously come under pressure. So there is a lot of focus. I mean, there's a lot more coal trends already, and they've taken, I think Transnet was saying they've taken something like 6,000 trucks off the road. I'm not sure it was a day or a month, but there are some more trains. So there's definitely a focus on the bulk iron ore coal, but there's definitely a focus on freight as well. So there's essentially another probably three big corridors: Joburg to Durban, Joburg to Port Elizabeth, and Joburg to Cape Town, that they should really want to get right. And those are the ones that they're focusing on. So Transnet's not going to get everything sorted out, but they're just trying to focus on the key things. So, I mean, within Transnet, we'll write a little bit about this intuition next week. We were at a conference a couple of weeks ago where some of these topics came up. I think what's really encouraging in Transnet is that the new CEO, Michelle Phillips, is chalk and cheese to the previous administration at Transnet or the executive suite. There's a much more proactive can-do attitude within Transnet. They're listening to what business has to say. They're trying to find solutions. One of the companies that we really like, or know from past presentations, is Afrimat. One of the things that Afrimat does is supply quarry material. And one of those products is batters for railway lines, the stones that go on the railway lines. And I mean, even 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were chatting to them, and they were just saying they are so busy supplying batters to Transnet. And Transnet's doing maintenance on the lines and getting these lines back up and running and sorting them out. So that's a company who has no reason to lie and say, well, we just can't supply Transnet with enough of this stuff. They're taking it all. So listen, I think on Transnet, if you compare it to 10 years ago, it might take quite a long time for them to get back to where they were 10 years ago. But if they're better than last year, from an economic point of view, that's what you want to see. As long as they're improving year on year, that's going to be growth for the economy. It's not to say that they're back where they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. That might take another 15 years. But as long as we're moving in the right direction, that's contributing positively to the economy. Okay. So the next question, yes.
Michael, thank you very much for a very positive presentation tonight. Can you just tell us what you think of the threats of Zuma and MK and the unions will have on our portfolios?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I was saying this morning that, I mean, Robin and I were traveling last week. We had some time in cars and on aeroplanes and things to chat and to discuss some of these issues at length. I think from our point of view, the threat to the Constitution is at the lowest point it's been probably in the last 20 years, you know, and I don't say that glibly. I say that because you've got a coalition now in government with sort of 68% of the DA and a few other parts, IFP and the ANC. MK and EFF have got what, sort of 23, 24% or whatever it is between the two of them. If they teamed up with the ANC, plus all the other smaller parties, they might get to 66%. It's pretty clear that the ANC is going to split because, you know, the whole ANC is not going to vote for a change in the Constitution. I think it's been pretty clear out of this process in terms of the GNU being formed on the principles of respect for the Constitution, and that was obviously very important to the DA. So from that point of view, I think that the threat of land expropriation and other big changes to the Constitution are actually more remote than they've ever been, which is really, really positive. I can't answer a question about whether MK will cause violence. I mean, you know, I don't know what they're going to do, but I think that, I don't know, I hope not, but I do think that, generally speaking, we should really also applaud the fact that there's actually been a transfer of power in this country without any issues. You know, the ANC has actually acknowledged that they've lost. They've formed a government of national unity. There's been no violence or anything around that. And it's not to say that MK can't cause trouble, but I think the ANC is also much more prepared for it, and they you know, there's more security in the tell definitely than, you know, pre-elections and things. So I don't know what's going to happen any more than anybody else does, and we could wake up tomorrow and find that there's some protests and things going on, or who knows, that's but not. But I don't think that MK is as powerful a voice as they think they are. That's probably my
That's interesting and generally positive. You know, he's talking about the combinations
what's
of.
your thinking on the NHI bill?
I have not read all my emails today, unfortunately.
Not all
There was a comment on this in one of
yeah.
my emails, and I would be much better informed
Yeah,
to tell you about it. Yeah, listen, I don't know. I think there was debate. I think even before the election, there was a lot of debate. And what seems to have come out post the election is that one of the reasons why the ANC got so much less than everybody thought was because a lot of government workers voted for other parties, not the ANC, because they don't want the NHI, because their pension, you know, their medical aid is with private health care, with Jenny's and other things, and they don't want to be sent to Edinburgh or wherever the case is, you know. And I think it was, you know, from the political analysis that we've read and that we listened to post the election, that was a real factor in the elections is the NHI bill and how popular it was with a lot of middle income, largely government employees, but other people as well. So I'm sure there's going to be debate about the NHI. Our view before the election was that I don't even think in the next 10 years it's going to be implemented. You know, I think there's so much water to flow under the bridge. It's going to be challenged and enforced by a whole host of providers. So it is unsettling, and one thing you hope is that that uncertainty doesn't chase doctors away. But I think we're actually very far from seeing some concrete evidence or concrete developments on NHI. It's not something that's keeping us awake at night. I made a very poor comment this morning, and I'm not going to repeat it here, but because I was shouted down. But I think, you know, for the next 10 years, you don't have to really worry about the NHI. And I think changes and things that are coming will be quite well forecast. You know, I don't think our line and our medical aid is going to change for a very long time. Yes.
Michael, I recently read that Pick n Pay and multi-choice are in financial difficulties. How's that going to affect the market? There are multi-billion companies.
Yeah, listen, I mean, Pick n Pay has been in trouble for quite a long time, and I think, you know, food retail is a very competitive business, and if you take your foot off off the pedal, you slacken up for a little bit. There's competitors snapping at your heels all the time. And so 7 or 8 years ago, Shoprite fell on very hard times. They had some huge losses in Africa. They really had to pull back and consolidate. And they came out of that firing, and Pick n Pay has kind of now fallen into the trap of taking its eye off the ball, not reacting to consumer trends. I think their whole decision to kind of split Pick n Pay into Pick n Pay, and you've seen QualiSave, which is kind of it's been a disaster. And so some of the issues at Pick n Pay are really down to their own management. So I think from a market point of view, it doesn't really affect the market at all. That's probably the answer, because it's one company out of many, and what Pick n Pay loses, Spar and Woolies and Shoprite are gaining on the other side. So it just depends where you position. So I don't really think that a company having difficulties impacts the market as a whole, but it's not great for the economy if Pick n Pay is because they are a big employer, they are a big chain. But listen, Pick n Pay I don't think is going under or going into liquidation. They've got some troubles, but they're already sorting it out, and they're going to do some things to unlock value. But like happens with so many companies, and I think this is also maybe a lesson to take into overseas. When interest rates are quite low, you can make, quite a lot of companies over the last 10 years have racked up too much debt. And then interest rates go a lot higher. Suddenly your interest payments balloon, even in a company, the same as an individual, and your profitability comes under pressure, and you don't have as much money to invest in your stores or to keep prices low or to freshen up the stores and make sure it's a nice shopping environment, and you lag behind, and then it becomes a vicious circle. So I think that's a lesson for a lot of companies that people have borrowed too much money, and actually at some point, companies have got to pay back that money. So we prefer companies at the moment with not so much debt, that have much stronger balance sheets. MultiChoice is a little bit different. They've got operations across Africa, and exactly the same as MTN or Vodacom or MultiChoice. Things that are happening in Nigeria and Egypt and these countries are having a huge impact on them, because in Nigeria, their currency is devalued by 50 or 60%. So, it's a big market. You're making a lot of money there. When you take the money out and bring it back, A, you can't take the money out. They won't let you. B, when you actually have to translate it back into rands, it's worth a fraction of what it was a year ago or 2 years ago. And so it sort of looks like a massive loss. But obviously, MultiChoice is busy being bought. Well, there's an offer for MultiChoice from the French company Canal Plus. There's probably quite a good option for MultiChoice to combine. I think the world on things like media, with Netflix's and the media companies combine to get bigger and to be more defensive, and the only way they can really survive. So for MultiChoice to merge, there is the option. I think that Canal Plus might list on the JSE once the merge is done, which would then essentially give investors access to the same industry with a much stronger company. So it's not a bad outcome if you're a MultiChoice shareholder. We haven't really liked MultiChoice for a long time, because I think anybody you speak to, if it wasn't for sport, no one would see CSTV. I'm probably ask you to raise your hand, and probably raise your hand for that exact reason. So we just kind of feel that it's under pressure, but I don't think it's bad for the market per se. Okay. Yes.
So the discovery of oil and gas off the southern coast, that number too early to sort of discuss it.
Yeah, actually, that's the question that got me into trouble this morning. So I'm going to be a bit more cautious about what I say tonight. But yeah, listen, I think it's very, it's obviously great that the country discovered oil and gas, and it could be a game changer for our economy. I think it's a really tricky time though, because attitudes towards oil and gas are changing pretty quickly. And if Shell or Total or something said, okay, we're going to go and we need $20 billion to bring these oil fields, or 20 billion rand to bring these oil fields into production, who's going to lend them the money to do that? Because the banks, the Standard Bank says, yes, we'll finance it. You can't even get near their building when they have their AGM, because you've got millions of climate protesters protesting outside and trying to break their windows. And it's a pretty difficult industry. I don't think that we're going to win ourselves with oil and gas anytime soon. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's actually feasible. I don't think it's physically possible, but attitudes towards it are changing. And so to invest in new production and new facilities is actually becoming quite challenging. It's quite exciting that we found this stuff. I think from our point of view, it's going to be quite a long time before we see any real benefit of that. And so I don't think that we should be pinning our hopes on something like that changing our economy anytime soon. I think it's probably, again, 10 years away by the time we jump through all the hoops and things like that. Yeah. Okay, everybody, I'm sure everybody's desperate for a glass of wine. As I said earlier, we are celebrating tonight. It's reason to celebrate. So join us, please celebrate, enjoy a drink with us, and thank you for coming. And we'll look forward to progressing the conversation in the second half of the year when we have more good news to share. Thank you.